So collective decision making is, as simple as it sounds, making decisions as a collective. But I think it's more helpfully defined by what it isn't, which is the traditional ways of decision making that we often fall into when we have to make decisions as a group, which is the loudest voice makes the decision, or the people who speak up more frequently make the decision, or the people who are often deferred to make that decision. And collective decision making really describes the variety of techniques and approaches that ensure any decision as a group is made by that group entirely as an inclusive process. So networks are a fascinating example of really intricate power dynamics, people with different expectations and different levels of understanding and different skills. And again, with decision making, it's easy to fall into traditional routines. So it's really important, if a network is to be functional, not only in being effective as much as possible, but also being inclusive of its members and getting that wider perspective that enables more innovative thinking. We really need in networks to have processes that both practical in terms of how are people actually coming together and actually sharing ideas, but also more experiential in that how are people made to feel able that they can contribute to a decision. And I think when you've got people together in a room, it's relatively easy, but when you've got a more dispersed network, it's an incredibly complicated idea. So the clearer our processes are, the easier those decisions will be able to be collectively. I think collective decision making is useful at all scale, from huge decisions about the function and value of networks, those really high level strategic decisions, what should we be doing, why do we exist, down to really specific ones in terms of should we engage with this funder, should we take part in this event. There are times when collective decision making maybe can be delegated to a smaller subgroup, but then it's still collective decision making. I think there's very little reason that decisions should not be made collectively in a network. So I think my top tip would be really thinking about the outcome of a collective decision making process. There are lots of different techniques and tools you can use, but it's worth thinking about how you are creating that space that people actually are able to contribute their own ideas. It's one thing holding a vote, but if people don't understand what's being asked, or they don't really believe that their vote counts, it can be a bit of a meaningless process. So I think my tip would be really mapping out the process of that decision-making experience. How are you opening that up? How are you exploring the idea and allowing people to really think about how their perspective will impact this decision? And then how are you closing that in a way that makes that decision-making a really inclusive experience? So one of my favourite examples is using spectrum lines. Often when making a decision in a group, for example, about communication strategy, example I've used, getting people to think about what they need in order to be able to communicate what the network is, there can be really complicated ideas, and people often don't feel, A, that they have a clear opinion, or that their opinion is valid, because it's such a complicated idea. But using a spectrum line and getting people to map out their opinions relative to everybody else is a really nice way of getting people to physically demonstrate what they think without having to verbalise it, because often that makes some people uncomfortable and only those people who are used to speaking up will speak up. But it also allows people to see roughly what their opinion is relative to others, which again is a really nice thing to visually map out so people get that understanding. And once you've done something like that, a decision is much easier to discuss and come to, because consciously everybody is aware of the spectrum of opinions that is in the room.